I'd like to call the meeting of the Fargo School Board to order. Thank you for being present. We will approve the agenda first. There is a HR addendum at your place, and also I'm requesting to move business item 7B up before item 4. I would entertain a motion.
I move adoption of the agenda with the addition of HR addendum and the movement of item 7B to follow the student performance.
Thank you. Motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Motion carried. Thank you. We have a very special treat here tonight, very close to my heart, music in the schools, and I will turn it over to Denise Odegaard.
We're celebrating Music in Our Schools Month, and for this evening's performance, we have, I'm going to introduce Darcy Brandenburg, the band director at Davies, to introduce the 3 students and what they'll be performing tonight.
Thank you so much for having us. As Denise said, my name is Darcy Brandenburg, and I teach instrumental music at Davies High School, and I have the pleasure of teaching these fine young gentlemen behind me. I'm going to turn the floor over to them to let them introduce themselves as well as their piece.
Hello, I'm Neelai Patel. I'm a junior at Davies.
I'm Alex Wittemacky, a senior.
I'm Andrew Harsager. I'm a junior at Davies.
We will be playing Stubernick by Mark Ford.
Bravo. Fantastic. In case anyone has any questions for the musicians themselves, I want to say congratulations to all three of you, and good to see Neelay Patel again, who was a finalist in the Fargo Moorhead Symphony's Young Artist Solo Competition in January. So wonderful to hear you performing in an ensemble. So anybody have any questions for the performers?
No question, just wow.
Such a cool piece. Well, thank you so very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And I'd like to thank their instructor, Darcy Brandenburg, one more time. Why don't you stand up? I think we need to applaud you, too. All right. I just wanted to, I was asked to give a little overview of what we offer in the public schools. So as soon as we're warmed up there, we'll start. Go like this. So how many of you have sat in the percussion section before and done that before? No. I think that's probably a first for a lot of people to be able to sit in that close to a percussion ensemble performance.
Denise, are you doing the steam monitoring report now? Is that what you were about to do right now? Or are the two separate things? I just need to do one thing before.
Why don't you do that while they
Okay,
put
okay,
that on?
great, thanks. And I'm sorry to go out of order, but I need to do 7B first. So let's jump to that. We need a committee of 3 volunteers to do the superintendent contract review and negotiations, and I'll just take a show of hands if someone is willing to volunteer. Okay, I'm going to go with Rebecca and Jennifer and Robin, please. No? Yeah, that's fine. Okay. That was my task that I had to do tonight, so I have completed it.
President Boyd,
Yes.
you will need a chair for that committee as well.
Okay, I would go with, I'll go with Robin. You literally got the nod. All right, thank you, Robin, for volunteering to chair that. Okay, are we good? So there will be no FEA report tonight. David Marquardt was unable to attend. So now, Denise, if all is made ready, we'll jump into your report. And forgive me when I have to slip out.
Okay, thank you. I'll just have you turn around and look at the screen. This is our logo for this year, Music Inspires, and as you can see, it not only inspires the musicians, but inspires people that are listening as well. Benefits are very evident when you study music program. It ties into an emotional awareness with the kids. It's not just about the learning, the notes and the rhythms, but it is a good emotional avenue for kids. Reflective learning, they have to make decisions on the spot when they're performing. They have to communicate with each other. They have to do everything at the same time. And then they communicate with the audience. And through all of that, they have to have perseverance and grit to practice. This did not happen overnight, what you just saw. It takes hours and hours and hours of practice. So one of the things with the new Every Student Succeeds Act, which was the former NCLB, is that music is enumerated as its own subject. And this was the work of our National Music Organization to go to the Hill every year and to form those relationships with people in Congress to be able to say music is one of those well-rounded subjects that all students should study. And we are a 21st century school, and I had my teachers do an exercise a couple years ago, and we just talked through what do we do in music, and the theater arts people also did this. What do we do that's critical thinking, collaboration, communication, and creativity? And so they made the list, and we've made a poster now that's in every classroom that explains what we do and how that ties into 21st century skills. So some of the offerings that we have for elementary kids, the co-curricular groups we have are hand chimes, choir, world drumming at Ed Clapp, folk dance at Centennial, And orchestra starts in 5th grade, and we have adaptive music classes. Now, every elementary school has a choir and hand chimes, but some of those specific things like world drumming and folk dance are unique to a particular elementary school. We have a very unique experience for our 1st through 6th graders through the Learning Bank, which is a consortium between Moorhead, West Fargo, and Fargo Public Schools. And these are the things that we offer the students, of one performance each year in a fine arts performance facility. Some of them are cultural. We have Steve Stark doing Mr. History. We have every genre type of music, jazz, symphony. Linda would know about the symphony part. And we even have steel drum band over at Moorhead State that the kids go to. There again is the rest of the list. And in 6th grade and 2nd grade, we have a cultural group come in from Kansas City that talks about the Ukraine and Russia and the culture and the music. They learn to dance and they play the spoons and all sorts of things during that experience. So at the middle school, our instructional classes are on the left. You can read those. We also have adaptive music in middle school. And on the right are the co-curricular groups. And it can range from any kind of choir to jazz band to percussion, brass, woodwind ensembles to chamber orchestra. And those are done usually outside the school day. In high school, we have on the left the instructional classes, and then on the right the co-curricular groups. The 9th and 10th grade show choir fills the gap between middle school and then the auditioned select choir at the high school. We have pep band, we have drumline at the high school, and so as you can see, there's a wide range of things that are offered from K through their senior year. We've had some students audition because of the kind of education they're getting here in Fargo Public Schools. They've auditioned for some national things, so I just wanted to share those with you real quick. Our all-national honors ensemble, 2 students from North High went, Mason Tack, cello, Lexi, Limestead choir, and they performed at the Grand Ole Opry in Nashville in October. A couple students have auditioned for Carnegie Hall School Honors Performance Series in February. We have Cameron Solberg, oboe, North High, and Tyrese Childs choir, South High. A couple of kids are in the Macy's. These are kids that will be in the Macy's Day Parade in November. These are 2 Davie students, Lexi Belk flute and Sydney Brousseau flute, and they'll be in New York City. So these kids are having some great national experiences because of the training they've had here. Some of the activities the high school kids do, we have Solo and Ensembles Day. These kids will be, the ones you heard tonight, will be performing in an ensemble contest for EDC and state. We have All-State done through our state association. Some of the colleges have festivals. We have jazz festivals. I think they were also at the Raging Red Band Festival today. These kids have kind of performed all day, so they've been busy. And I don't know if any of you know about this unique opportunity that we were given a couple years ago for the Metropolitan Opera in New York. Invited us to be an educational partner, so we get 50 tickets to 4 live in HD opera showings at the Century 10 Theater. So these kids get to see up close. This is a picture of one of the operas, and you can see the beautiful color costumes, and they get to have backstage tours through this whole experience of going to the opera on a Saturday. And those operas can be probably 3 to 4 to 5 hours long, and they sit through those and enjoy those. So that's a great opportunity for us. We have new standards this year that we are working on, and it's basically creating, performing, responding to music. And so that's, all of the arts have the same 11 anchor standards, and they all deal something with creating, performing, or presenting, and responding. So we're all working together on those national standards. And then to wrap it up, we are waiting to hear if we are again best communities for music and education. And we've won all those years. And I put a little square in there on what are some of the questions they ask us. The numbers of kids participating or scheduling, how we're funded, what kind of extra groups we have, and then how the community and the school board supports that. So that's a great tribute to the collaboration that everybody does to support the arts and music in the public schools. So I'd be open to any questions, and I appreciate you inviting us here tonight to come into your meeting and share some music with you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Denise, and congratulations for such an outstanding music program and every year achieving that recognition on a national basis. It's fantastic, and our whole community really benefits when we have such high-quality music education. Anyone have any questions? John?
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. This isn't so much a question as a comment. I have a bias because my little tiny hometown of Crystal, North Dakota had a marimba player, and he was so brilliant, everybody knew that he was off the charts brilliant, and he became the second ever Rhodes Scholar in the history of North Dakota. So I'm expecting one of these three, or maybe all three of you, to compete for Rhodes Scholarships. Your performance was just inspiring, to say the least. And last comment I'd just share with the board is someday I think it would be awesome to add the National School Boards Association to the list of performances as a community-supported endeavor. But it's just absolutely inspiring what you brought to us tonight. Thank you all.
Well, thank you for letting us be here. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Denise and team. What a treat, huh? It took everything I had not to stand up for standing ovation, but. All right, next item on the agenda is recognition of the audience, and nobody did sign up to address the board. However, we don't want to make those assumptions. Is there anybody in the audience that wishes to address the board at this time? Okay, thank you. Staff reports. We have, oh, we're skipping.
Yeah, we already did this.
Okay, gotcha. Sorry. Consent agenda with an HR addendum is in front of us. I would entertain a motion.
Also move, Madam Chair.
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. All in favor of passing the consent agenda as presented with the HR addendum, please vote by saying yes.
Yes.
Any opposed, no. All right. On to the business section. First item is superintendent evaluation. All 9 board members did put some deep thought into this. And is there anything that anybody would like to discuss before we move on and hear from Jeff? Jim?
Yeah, I'd like to move that we accept the Superintendent March 2016 annual evaluation as provided in our packet.
Second.
Okay, discussion. Kind of speaks for itself. Very, just to highlight, everything was very positive. All 9 board members thought that Dr. Schatz's performance was very satisfactory, so that means that we'll have our work cut out for us as the compensation committee convenes. I will take a vote, and then I would assume Jeff wants to address the board? Sure. Okay, I guess we need a roll motion, or a roll call vote.
Goldenberg,
Yes.
Johnson,
Yes.
Knutson,
Yes.
Paulson,
Yes.
Strand,
Yes.
Benson,
Yes.
Nelson.
Yes. Motion carries unanimously. Jeff?
Well, as I've said in the past, the support is very much appreciated, and as we know, we've assembled a really strong team, and I really have a great group of people that I work with the cabinet, all the way through the administrative group that we have in the district, the teachers. As you know, I'm out in the buildings quite a bit and get to see what's happening, and couldn't be more proud of all the things that go on in our district, and then working with the board has been a great experience, and I just feel like we're all working together and trying to do the best we can to afford kids the great opportunities that we see here tonight. So let's all just continue to do that. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. Okay, next item, GP3E, policy revision. We have that in front of us. Jim?
I move adoption of the changes to GP3E as outlined in memo number 100.
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Any discussion? All right. Anne Marie?
Johnson,
Yes.
Knutson,
Yes.
Paulson,
Yes.
Strand,
Yes.
Benson,
Yes.
Goldenberg,
Yes.
Nelson.
Yes, motion carries. On to board reports. Jim, you want to kick us off on our budget assumptions for next school year?
Sure. Planning met, and Brock and his budget team have obviously already been busy trying to build or start the building of the 2016-17 budget. At planning, we took a first look at what we anticipate our revenues are going to be based upon the frozen mill levy on the property tax side of things, and what we would expect to receive in foundation aid based upon our projected ADM number, which is still a moving target. Long story short, if everything happens the way we'd like it to in terms of our ADM number, we're going to be looking at a general fund revenue picture of $147,851,936. That is approximately about 3.62 million more than what we actually think we're going to see in general fund dollars for the current school year. And while that may seem like a whole lot of money, if we just take the salary information based upon the negotiated agreement and look at what the salary increase alone is going to be, that will take up $2.8 million of this potential 3.62 increase before we add any staff to address additional students. We, of course, also have a couple other pretty big items happening, one being a new elementary school coming online in September called Eagles Elementary. We will have an automatic increase in our transportation contract as per it. So long story short, by the time we factor in the expense items that we really don't control unless we do something dramatically different as a district in our delivery model, we're probably in the red going into the beginning of the budget cycle. So Brock has obviously been working with his team. He's been notifying all departments, all buildings, first of all, to not go crazy spending any unused budget dollars this year. Obviously, if things have to be purchased, they're going to be purchased with the budget allocation that we're given. But he's already trying to get people to think about how can we pinch a few pennies going forward. So hopefully we won't have too draconian of a situation by the time we get to the end of the budget process. And I'll let the rest of the board know this. I would have been doing this tonight, but it requires notification first. So I'm notifying you now as a board that I will be asking for a business item on our next agenda for a reconsideration of the board action on its own salary that we took at a previous meeting. In light of what we're going to be asking our staff, I think we need to at least revisit that for the coming school year and decide if that's prudent or if we should take a different course of action and lead by example. So I'll request that be a business item for us to address at the next meeting. Overall, I don't want to paint too big of a gloom and doom picture because, quite frankly, our administrative team, led by Dr. Schatz, budget committee headed up by Brock, are going to bring us a balanced budget at the end of this process. But it certainly is going to be the biggest challenge they've had in recent years based upon frozen mill levy, which means frozen local dollars. And just a side note, I'll give you more on it when we get into the actual committee reports. The estimate we had this year for revenue from the state appears to be coming in about 1.7 million less than we had budgeted, and that is due to ADM, which is a fluctuating number. Unfortunately, on any given day, 5% or more of our students are not in school for whatever reasons, sick, traveling on vacation, whatever it might be. And just because they're a student in our district doesn't mean we get paid for them. We get paid based on them being in a seat on a particular day. And our ADM number appears to be coming in much lower than we had originally forecasted in the budget. So again, we're going to be looking at some adjustments as we close out this year, trying to make sure we balance the budget as best possible with that revenue shortfall that we're now anticipating from the state. So I think that's it for budget assumptions. Brock and his team are busy obviously looking at all of the escalators that will happen that are past our control, so they can really get at the bottom line of what do we have for discretionary funding for new initiatives, or perhaps more to the case, what is the shortfall that we have to go find to end up with a balanced budget. Any questions on that one?
You must have done a good job, Jim. Thank you. Jim, you're next again on North Dakota School Boards Association update.
Yep. North Dakota State School Board Association had a meeting here a couple of weeks ago. One of the three we have each year, sometimes four when they get real excited, but three big topics that I just wanted to brief you on. First one is the new superintendent evaluation system, which the State School Board Association has developed with a firm out of Montana. Is getting well received by a number of small to mid-sized districts. I'm not so sure any of the large districts had the same issues with superintendent evaluation that smaller districts did. I did give the most recent information to Anne Marie so she could look at it to see if it would make sense for us as a district to go down that path, although I suspect we'll keep with our current system unless she comes back with a different recommendation, and I'll support her recommendation. As you're all aware of the fact, we have a new federal law, Every Student Succeeds Act, replacing No Child Left Behind. And a lot of people are pretty fired up and excited about what a great thing this was, because number one, it takes control out of the federal government and gives it back to state and local, in theory at least. And I stress the in theory because none of the details have been flushed out. One of the biggest things that has to happen is each and every state in the country has to develop their own state standards. Now, we could indeed just re-anoint the current set of state standards we just got done developing in North Dakota, which parallel in one sense to what many people call the Common Core standards, although they're not identical to what the generic Common Core would be. North Dakota School Boards Association is basically volunteering Nita Thomas, who is our legal counsel and used to be obviously working for the legislature, to help DPI in drafting the legislation that's going to have to be adopted to have North Dakota come in compliance with ESSA. I don't know if I should call it a fear, but one of the reasons we took this action as a state board was we're in an election year, so obviously the superintendent is pretty busy on a re-election campaign. Not to say she isn't pretty busy running the Department of Public Instruction. And our fear was that if we don't get busy coordinating the development of whatever legislation needs to get put forward, that legislation will get developed once the legislatures get back together in Bismarck by the legislators themselves, who may not be the best experts on K-12 education in our state. So John Martinson and Anita, I believe last week, met with Kristen Besler to talk about what we could do to help coordinate the department's efforts and putting together whatever legislative package needs to be put together for North Dakota to actually come in compliance with the new ESSA. And I'll keep you posted as that develops and I get updates, hopefully from John Martinson. And the third thing, which I had alluded to probably in an earlier board meeting, North Dakota State School Boards Association has drafted a piece of legislation. It's my understanding we currently have about 6 legislators signed on to sponsor it, and certainly reaching out to more, that would basically take the REAs and have them come under the purview of the State Board of Public Education. Currently, there is no hierarchy structure for the REAs to report into the state, even though they receive public dollars through foundation aid formula and actually public dollars through membership dues from public school districts. So we're going to put forward a piece of legislation to have them report through the State Board of Public Education with accountability in terms of their work, their budgets, their expenditures of public funds going back to DPI. Not sure if all the parties involved with this are quite happy at this point in time. The REAs have kind of been neutral thus far. They're well aware that this legislation is going to be brought forward. Interestingly enough, a couple people that serve on the State Board of Public Education are not sure they want the job. And for those of you that are probably maybe wondering, well, what is the State Board of Public Education? Their primary duty has to do with school districts that consolidate. So if two smaller districts that are declining enrollment decide they want to merge and become a consolidated school district, it goes through the State Board of Public Education. Absent that, they have a few other responsibilities in state statute having to do with the Education Land Trust Fund. But basically, it's a pretty easy gig today. And I think they're a little bit worried that this might give them actually work to do on an ongoing basis, but they're still not opposed to it. They're just trying to get their hands around what it would really mean to them as a board and what their responsibilities would be. It's my understanding that DPI is familiar with the legislation and is supportive of it at this point in time, but obviously we're a long way till January when the legislature convenes. So those were the three big topics that obviously one or more will spill back to impact us, in particular this development of new state standards and all the implementation of ESSA. Certainly will end up having ramifications for every school district in the state. I'd take any questions on the North Dakota State School Board Association meeting if anybody has any.
Jim, talk to us about the makeup of the State Board of Education. Are they appointed?
Yeah, by the governor, and that's one of the other things we're trying to change in the language, because currently there's some ad hoc people appointed, but then there are people from particular networks. For instance, there is a person that is a school board member appointed. There is a person from NDEA appointed, but there is no NDEA any longer. So they got to do a little language rewrite there to get North Dakota United into the code. But yes, they are appointed by the governor to be on the State Board of Public Education.
Thank you, Jim. No other hands for Jim? All right. Southeast Education.
Well,
Update.
this is because I missed the meeting, so I get all my reports at one time. And it was actually good that I missed the meeting because the SEEC board meeting happened after our last board meeting on Wednesday the 24th, and I did manage to get to that one. I'd highlight four things going on at the SEEC, I guess. Number one, as you're all aware of the fact, we're busy as an organization building the transition platform to become a freestanding entity. The biggest change that we'll see at Fargo Public Schools in that will really be in Brock's area, as we will no longer be serving as their fiscal agent. And it isn't just fiscal agent, we also are their HR department currently, which is probably even more work than being their fiscal agent. I think Brittany has the bulk of the work, but Brock certainly could argue that point with me. Both of them are knee-deep in trying to make sure we're serving the needs of the SEEC. I had a preliminary look at the new benefit package that SEEC employees will be getting supposedly as early as July 1st. So I think they're still of the mindset that they will cut the cord with Fargo Public Schools effective July 1st and become a freestanding entity. Lots of little bugs to be worked out in that process, and I have no doubt that they'll be talking to Jackie quite a bit, talking to Brittany quite a bit, probably talking to other people in Brock's end of the operation as that date approaches, and it wouldn't shock me if we get a few phone calls after that date occurs too. So that's a pretty big project going on at the SEEC. In addition to that, they have created a new policy manual. We were supposed to review it at our last board meeting. It was only 299 pages, at which point in time I suggested maybe we should individually read it and offer any suggestions to the director, and then he could sort through those as opposed to having a 12-hour meeting. I did mention to him that sometimes less is more when it comes to policies, but they've covered just about everything from the kitchen sink to the nail under the shingle. and trying to identify exactly how everything's supposed to work as an organization going forward. One bit of news that was shared with not only SEEC but the other REAs, and I guess we shouldn't really be shocked, but it appears the Hess Corporation is not going to renew their Succeed 2020 grant, which was being used by the REAs to try and increase graduation rates, increase career and technical education opportunities, and really, in one sense, create more workers potentially for the oil patch, although it certainly was broader than that. There's still 2 more years in that grant runoff from the original grant, but they have already notified everybody that is not their intent to renew that once it runs out. The state will either have to determine to fund those programs that have been funded through that grant, or those programs will have to be absorbed through other operating dollars in the REAs across the state. And in some senses, I suspect some of those programs will just flat out disappear because I'm not so sure there's excess money at the state or in most of the REAs to pick up that slack. And last big item, and I wish I could give you more details on this, but apparently the REAs are still moving forward with the idea of creating a state structure called the North Dakota REA. I think they have a goal in mind of having the first board meeting for this new entity that would kind of be an umbrella organization over all 8 REAs would be in June of 2016. The fascinating part of that is nobody knows what the makeup of the board would be, how board members would come to be. So until they get that figured out, I'm not really sure how they can have their first meeting in June, and you know the clock is ticking. Whether or not this thing comes to fruition as it's been dreamt is anybody's guess. Again, they got some grant money from an organization to explore this thing. It has really been championed by Kyle Davidson out of the SEEC, and I can't remember the gal's name out of the REA up in Grand Forks region. They've been kind of the coordinators using their resources, their staff, to try and mesh together what the ND REA could look like, what its role would be, and how it would operate. But it starts with having a board of some kind, and until they figure out that piece and then get all 8 REAs on board and agreeing to it, not much more is going to come to fruition. But I think it's still in the works, so I would expect perhaps at my next SEEC board meeting, I'll hear about what they think the right idea for a board makeup would be, and we'll probably be asked to either endorse that approach, modify it, or turn it down, in which case all 8 REAs have to be in agreement to move forward. We'll see how that goes. And I think that's it for SEEC.
Thank you, Jim. All right, Dinah is going to explain about her new position on the Educational Standards and Practices Board.
So I was asked to tell you about the ESPB, and I thought that it's not just a report like Jim gives us every week or every meeting of the kinds of things he's just done. And I guess that most of you, like me, don't know exactly, or didn't know exactly what the ESPB does. So I borrowed this PowerPoint, and Kirby refined it, so he's not here right now. And they told me I can do this from here. So everybody thinks, in the general public, that the job of the ESPB, which is Education Standards and Practices Boards, is to issue licenses for teachers and administrators across the state. And that is probably the biggest job. But you hear about us in the news when there is a high-profile case with somebody who's gone astray. But there is a lot more to it than that. So a little bit of background. The ESPB was established in 1993 and started its work in January of 95. There are 10 board members. 4 are public school teachers. 1 is a private school teacher. 2 are school board members. 2 administrators or superintendents, and 1 dean of a college of education appointed by the governor in an application process. And generally speaking, the individuals are asked to apply from their own organizations. Several of the teachers are active in the, I guess, NDU now. And and I was asked to apply through the State School Boards Association and through JIM. So, and the superintendent of public instruction is a non-voting ex officio member, and we serve 3 terms for a maximum of 2 consecutive terms. 3-year terms for a maximum of 2. So these are the folks that are on the board currently. You'll notice that Kim Belgard, who you all know, I assume, is a Fargo public teacher, and the rest are from different parts of the state. So what do? We meet in Bismarck once a month for a full-day meeting, and we grant licenses. The board basically only sees the complicated cases, which my first meeting was 10, and they range in documents from anywhere from 10 pages to 100 pages to read for each of those. And those are the ones you see in the media. Otherwise, the licenses are diverse types of licenses, from your initial license as a teacher to a renewal of a license to a temporary license to a substitute temporary license. There's all forms of licenses. And if you meet all the necessary requirements and nothing comes up on your background check, then it's a pretty standard process that doesn't actually come to the board for review. But when there's questionable cases or background, those things come to the board and we review them, and you hear about them in the media usually. Program approval means the educational program approval in all of the state educational institutions in the state. This part is really interesting because I'm not a trained educator. Many of the folks on the board are. And it's really interesting to look at the pieces that are changing in the educational practices for our teachers and how we can hopefully influence that in a positive light, or at least support the positive pieces that are brought to us through the individual colleges and universities in the state. Professional development, professional practices, there's more slides, I think, sorry, with more details. Sorry, I shouldn't do this and jump ahead, but I think I covered those things about the licenses. Okay, I covered that, sorry. Program approval, I covered that, sorry. I forgot when it's not the slide presentation that you create. These are all the educational colleges throughout the state, some of which you probably didn't even know had educational colleges. Some of them are the tribe colleges and all across the state. And they have different programs, which I don't know all of the details yet of all of these different programs. Probably Dr. Agri and Dr. Gross could tell you more details about the individual programs, and certainly Brittany, who hires all of our teachers or is involved in all the credentials of all of our teachers. So professional development, this goes to the types of professional development that are offered, standards for professional development, teacher stipends for attending professional development. All of these things come through. There's a branch of our organization that handles a lot of this kind of stuff. I'm still learning about this. Remember, I've only been to 3 meetings. These are the folks who take care of the professional development side, and they're actually coming to the board meeting on Thursday this week to give us a presentation. So I'll probably have more detailed information on how this operates. But again, it's the board oversees and supports and authorizes changes and things going through this department. Professional practices, those of you who are educators will know that there's a new Educators Code of Ethics out there. So the role of the staff and the board is to approve these things and then to educate those for whom it makes a difference, that they know what's going on. Obviously, to uphold educational laws, the standards for where are we? Uphold the standards of the educator's code of ethics, which I mentioned, and give impartial consideration of all complaints filed against North Dakota educators. It's a lot easier to be the person sitting and reading your newspaper on a Monday morning and reading what you see in the newspaper than when you actually sit in a boardroom and realize, you're taking people's lives. But the important thing is what's most important for our kids and for education in all of these cases. And I'm certainly learning a lot in each one that I've been involved with. Administrative responsibilities. Obviously, we hire the education executive director who, in a similar way that we hire our superintendent, who is then responsible for hiring the rest of the staff and the day-to-day operations of the office. The legislative piece is a big piece, and actually, as Jim was saying with the North Dakota School Boards Association, the piece that's relevant, or particularly relevant to the ESPB in the new ESSA, is that they have removed the highly qualified piece that was a big part of NCLB, which therefore means that a lot of our rules about how we license folks in this state are then no longer applicable because the law has changed. But again, as Jim pointed out, all of the details have not been ironed out yet. But one of the roles of ESPB staff and then the board to approve is working on how our license rules and laws will change as a result of the new federal law. And we're trying to be proactive, just like NDSBA, by drafting and writing this legislation and getting approval so that we have influence over it, as opposed to the legislature telling us what to do beforehand. Obviously, we all know the way this works, that we don't always all get what we want, but it's really important to have the folks who are working in the field come forward with those recommendations rather than the other way around. So that is going forward in this year, a really big piece of what's going to be happening at ESPB. The laws, policies and procedures I mentioned, and obviously the financial resources of the organization, which, by the way, I don't think there was a slide about this, is ESPB is a fully self-funded organization. The fees for licenses and background checks and things of that sort are what funds the organization and the operation of the organization. So it's a totally independent financial organization. And this is our staff. Janet Welk is our executive director, who has actually notified us that she is retiring at the end of this year. And so on top of all other activities, we will be hiring a new executive director. And I am on the subcommittee for organizing and doing that. So I really jump in with 2 feet when I get a new role. That's it. That was all that I think I wanted to share, but I'd be happy to answer any questions. I just thought I'd give you an overview of what ESPB is. And as you've all heard me say when we're talking about new school board members, that they should really have an understanding of the time commitment that they're putting into the organization before they run and sign up for it. Well, this is a huge job. So if any of you are interested afterwards, I'll be more than happy to tell you how many hours I spend in addition to driving out to Bismarck. But so far it's been really interesting, and we'll see how it goes. But any questions, I'd be happy to answer. Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Dinah, that's really, really interesting. I'm just curious about process. If you have an evaluation or a weighing of the status of somebody's license, one of my questions is about privacy and protections in case there are allegations that maybe are unfounded or damaging. And I'm curious otherwise, like who brings the complaints forward? Is it the districts or law enforcement, or or who, or do they read it in the newspaper? You said these are the ones you read in the media?
All of,
I'm
all
just-
of the above kind of thing. So privacy, we're just like the school board. Everything is open meetings and open meeting records, and the only things, sometimes we get forms with redacted material in them, and that's the privacy piece. But our meetings are open meetings, so anything we discuss is open to the public. So how do we get this? Sometimes it's self-reported on an application for licensure that they've done something that, we need to talk about, like, oh God, anything from, DUIs or arrests, or whether they were, if something comes up in somebody's background check, because everybody has to have a background check. So if there are red flags that come up in the background checks, those come towards us. There were 2 cases in the media in the last week in parts of the state that came to us after they were in the media. If somebody has broken the law, like actually broken the law and been found guilty, obviously that comes before us. But there are, can come from an individual school district. There are all sorts of ways. So,
Might continue, do they have the right to represent or have representations or to appeal? And to be part of defending their reputation and names if need be?
yeah, everyone is given the opportunity to write a letter to the board prior to, which is part of the initial packet, explain whatever the circumstances are, and that obviously plays a big role in the board's decisions. The board can ask for more information if they don't feel that the file is complete. They can do any number of things, and certainly whatever the board decides, the individual has the opportunity to appeal. And but I haven't had since I've only been there 3 months, nobody has appealed anything yet. So I don't know how that process goes exactly. Any other questions?
Okay, I see no hands. Thank you for the report. Thank you for serving. It is a huge undertaking of time, and you are very patient, so you were appropriately appointed. So thank you for that. Before we go into committee and liaison reports, I wanted to give the staff any chance to share anything they want with the board, or Dr. Schatz.
As you know, on Monday night, we had our second task force meeting, and we had, again, very good attendance. We had only a couple people who could not be there, so we've had 38 to 40 people at those meetings. We did more presentations with regard to our overall budget, primarily on the expense side. Bob has put together, along with his team, a pretty comprehensive curriculum review, and so we spent time reviewing some of that with the group. And then the last 45 minutes of the meeting was given to the individuals in their groups to discuss their first impressions of everything that they've seen and read and heard. And so I'm going through that feedback that they've given us now, and we'll be using that to move forward for our next meeting to create the next set of questions for discussion for them to talk about. We're also going to do a SWOT analysis. It's a strategic planning term, but what I'd like the groups to do is to go through, and I'm going to have Rachel lead this. She does a really nice job with this, of identifying really what do they see as the strengths and the weaknesses, the opportunities and threats for us as a district. Ultimately, then, all of that information will be loaded back to them with regard to what they come up with when we look at common themes. And then we'll start getting to the point of talking about, okay, what do they see and how do they feel about what they see? And then obviously the end game here is to come back to you as a board and say, this group took a look at all of this. This is what they're seeing. This is what they're thinking. Here's for you to consider. And that's, I think, was the intent of doing this. And so far it's been a really good process, and the people that are involved are very committed. We asked them to be committed, and they have been. And so I'm very, very impressed with the group, and I think we'll continue to move forward as we go, and hopefully it'll give us some good feedback. That's all I have.
I agree. That's also a committed group. I think the handout last night was close to 100 pages of a lot of data. We would expect nothing less from you, Bob. A lot of data. Okay. Yes, you're right. All right. Committee liaison and correspondence reports. You want to start with Mr. Paulson here?
Sure. Since our last meeting, the Cass County Career and Tech Ed Governing Board met, And after their last meeting, or at the first meeting of the year, I gave you an update on the classes that were taught and whatever. I'm not going to go through that again. I guess the biggest thing is that Castleton has now joined. So it is now Fargo, West Fargo, Castleton, and Northern Cass. And the next meeting will be in April at Northern Cass, and I would assume that a tour of the greenhouse will be a big part of that. And then last night, the Horseman, or HMR PTA, which is now called the HMR Ruse. I don't have a clue why they do this, but apparently every time they have to apply for a new tax ID for exemption, they have to change their name. So that they can no longer be called the HMR PTA, so they voted unanimously last night to call themselves the HMR Ruse. They had a presentation from the Dakota Medical Foundation last night on Schools Alive. It's a program where they're trying to get schools and kids and families involved in healthy foods and healthy exercises and healthy choices. She went through, Miss Irie went through a presentation and explained many grants that are available, and they talked about how they were going to incorporate this into their upcoming carnival. And then they spoke a little bit about something that I was completely unaware of. There's a group called the Missoula Children's Theater. They have always been a part of Horseman Roosevelt and Lincoln and McKinley. Sounds like a tremendous opportunity for these kids. It's a presentation, there's costuming, there's kids that have director roles, and it will be presented in March at Ben Franklin. But the biggest topic of discussion was the fact that they've had so many kids involved that they've got to turn away kids. And this year, I think they had to turn away 6. Next year, they're looking at 32 kids that won't have positions. So they are in the process of having 2 presentations next year. One in September, October, and another one in March, so that they can get all of the kids involved. Sounded great. I'm going to make every attempt to see this when it occurs. Then they gave an update on some other things. The city PTA meeting is March 16th. The state PTA meeting will be in Fargo in April. And that is really an active bunch of people. Most of the, well, I shouldn't say most, a lot of the PTAs in town have a few members. This one there must have been close to 20 people there last night. And they really have their ducks in a row. They run a good organization up there, do a lot of good things for the school. I think that covers it.
Thank you. Dinah?
Nothing else at this time?
Okay. Jim?
As I mentioned earlier, planning met to look at a couple of items. One of the things we looked at was where we were sitting year to date on our general fund budget, and as I indicated in my earlier remarks, we're anticipating about 1.7 million in state per pupil aid that we had budgeted that we're not going to receive based upon the ADM count that gets forwarded into their system. Brock and his team are already trying to identify how we can absorb that loss without having to come back for a major budget adjustment. And there's obviously some good news along with bad news. Trollwood had just a spectacular year, and our overall costs for operating Trollwood appear to be coming in about $250,000 less than was budgeted, so there's $250,000 of savings. Same thing's going on in our activity budget. Todd and his staff have been working diligently to try and make our dollars go as far as possible and providing opportunities for our kids. But they're anticipating that we'll see a savings maybe in that same zone of about $250,000 on the activity budget, although obviously the school year is not out. And as more of our teams qualify for state, more of our dollars are going to get used as well. And of course, we have all been enjoying a record warm winter, which means overall our utility bills are down. Much like mine are at my house, so are the districts. So Brock is optimistic that he's already identified probably more than half of that shortfall from the state in savings in the existing line items of the budget. And as I mentioned, he's obviously in conversation with everybody throughout the district, making sure nobody feels an obligation to try to exhaust their budgeted amount by end of the year. Obviously, he wants them to spend whatever needs to be spent for the programming they wanted to do, but you don't have to have an extra 50 hula hoops just to use up the budget this year, because we would like to end up with close to a balanced budget at year end without having to take any kind of an adjustment off of our fund balance, which obviously at the end of the day we could if we needed to. One of the other items that we briefly talked about, and I'll just put it out there so the board can be aware of it because it'll come back to us at budget approval time. For many years, I don't know for sure how many, but for many years, by design, we have been basically deficit spending our food service nutrition budget. In part because we had built up a budget surplus there to anticipate the needs for new construction projects, new kitchens going in. All of those are either in place or getting finished up over at Eagles right now. And of course, we have a new director of nutrition services who came to Brock one day after she digested the entire budget, and she said, "If I go in the hole in my budget, do I lose my job?" Brock looked at her and said, "Not to worry, she'd keep her job, he'd lose his." You may recall, those of you that were on the board a few years ago, we had not raised food prices for quite some time, but we were actually, quite frankly, forced to by the federal rules to continue to qualify for the federal aid that we get for our nutrition services program. So I think it was 2 years ago, maybe 3 years ago, we did a price increase in our meals. I would anticipate as they're building out the nutrition services budget that we may well see an increase in meal prices coming for 2016-17. It's not for certain by any means, but based upon where they see their numbers coming in, where they see their expenses going out, and their desire to operate on a balanced budget rather than a deficit budget, that will probably be the recommendation coming forward on that budget. And obviously, if we are going to do a budget increase on meal cost, it isn't going to be dramatic, but the sooner we could make that decision and get that information out to parents, the better. So they'd have it long before we're back to school time next August when they're coming in to fill up the lunch card with dollars to start the school year. So that might be something we'll be seeing as that budget works its way through the process. I think that was it for planning. We did have to move our next planning meeting. We had a conflict for the first Friday in April, and I believe we're on March 29th, is it? Which is a Tuesday, same day as the board meeting, 7:30 right in this room. You're all welcome to join us. And that's it.
Thank you, Jim. John?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I don't have any committee reports, but I just anecdotally would like to acknowledge and commend Dr. Gross. I had a family reach out to me this last week, and we all have moments where people who may not know how to navigate the system and so on, they reach out to school board members. And, you know, 8 years ago when I started, I was told by a teacher's family member of mine, you never ever misrepresent your role as a school board member, but you connect them to this administration. And I've never had a moment yet where I've seen where there's been a dissatisfaction on the family's side with that. So thank you again. You know, when we do reach out to you, it's with all the confidence in the world that they will be calling up and thanking folks afterwards for having help bridge them to our administration.
Thank you. Rebecca?
Okay, last Monday, the calendar committee met, and I think it was for our last meeting because we did agree on a calendar that would be forwarded to the city PTA for the 17-18 school year. And so I had down that the city PTA meeting is March 23rd, but maybe it's not. Is it on the 16th or?
I was looking here, it says city PTA on May 20th. So that's the luncheon. He told us the 16th. I think he was wrong.
Okay, do you know when it is, Rachel?
No, not exactly, but I did talk to Nikki last night, and they are changing it, and they're looking at the 30th, but she and Mary were going to discuss and let us know tomorrow. So they haven't officially said it, but they're looking at the 30th. I'll know tomorrow.
Okay, so after that meeting, if they're happy with it, then it'll come to us. If they're not, then maybe the committee will have more work to do, but hopefully it'll sail on through. And the Communications Committee has a meeting on Monday, this coming Monday, the 14th at noon, and we'll continue to look at GP2E for any possible edits that or suggestions that we want to suggest to the board. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer.
Our next meeting for health insurance committee is the 22nd, so I have nothing to report until after that.
Okay, thanks. As far as governmental affairs go, I'm going to poll the committee to see, for agenda items to see if we need to meet this month. Eagles Elementary has announced their open house, and there was a change in that day too, so I don't want to tell you the wrong thing, so I'll give you all an update on that. But that's kind of an open house for families and the services that are going to be provided. And then last night, a couple of us were at the long-range financial planning workshop, and it's really nice to see how engaged everybody is. They are completely involved and very committed, so we've got some great community members on that task force. Any other reports before we leave? No? Okay. Our next meeting is March 22nd, and we are adjourned.